Hi, I'm Casey Chaffin, and welcome to another segment of our Shopsmith video library. The video that we have for you covers alignment and preventative maintenance of the Shopsmith Mark V 510 system. Now, we highly recommend that you use your Shopsmith video and your owner's manual in conjunction for your alignment procedures as well as preventative maintenance and safety. Now, with your Shopsmith Mark V, when you think about safety and alignment, of course, safety always comes first. What we recommend at Shopsmith is that when you go through your alignment procedures, that your cord be unplugged from your Mark V. Number two, we highly recommend that you use the sanding disc. It's your 12-inch sanding disc that you get with your Shopsmith to make sure that you're eliminating any possible pricks from the teeth of the saw blade. The sanding disc does give you a 12-inch surface. It is a flat surface. It's highly more accurate than the saw blade could possibly give you. Now, when we start off with the Shopsmith Mark V, it's important first that you know all the parts that you have with your machine. Number one, I'd like to introduce the Shopsmith Mark V 510. This is what we call the headstock. Now, with the headstock, you also have a quill. We'll be using the quill. And the lever that I'm using, we call the quill lever. It extends the quill out. With your Mark V here, you also have your table assembly. The table will be used not only in the actual work on this power tool, but also be used for the alignment procedures. To the right of the table, we have what we call the extension table. The extension table itself is used for various operations in woodworking, will also be used through the alignment procedures. The tubes that you see right here, the two tubes that mount the headstock assembly to the tubes, we call the weigh tubes. The two tubes directly underneath the weigh tubes, we refer to these as our bench tubes. Now, on top of those, what we have is a miter gauge. The miter gauge itself you'll be using for the alignment. It's also used for cross cuts and doing woodwork. On top of the miter gauge, you have a rip fence. The rip fence will also be aligning. The rip fence itself is used for ripping modes and various operations in woodworking with your Mark V. We also have a safety kit. Now, the safety kit itself isn't necessarily used in the setup and alignment, but it's an added feature that we've put with the Shopsmith Mark V. The safety kit itself covers your push block. It also includes what we call the fence straddler. You have a feather board, and you've got a push stick. Now, these items right here, we highly recommend that you use at all times when operating your Mark V or 510. Now, the tools that we'll be using for the actual alignment are the tools that I have behind me. And to point those tools out, number one, we have a straight edge. It's a 12-inch straight edge, the size of our sanding disc that we'll be using for the alignment. We also have a 5/32 Allen wrench, and also we'll be using other Allen wrenches in the alignment and setup of the 510. We have a square, and with the square, this is probably the most critical piece you'll be using. With the square, we recommend that you first check your square, and you have two ways to do that. One way, take a second square, identical to the one that you have, and place it inside. Look for any gaps that you have here. Of course, if you see gaps, keep checking until you find the best possible square, the most accurate to be used. Your second option in checking your square would be to take a block of wood. With your block of wood with a clean straight edge, we can lay that block right here. We take our square and we lay it right against the clean edge of the board. At this point, we take a pencil and we scribe a line right down the edge of the square. After doing that, simply take your square and just rotate it over. Lay it right up against your first line, take your pencil and scribe a second line. Now, by doing this, it allows you to gauge whether or not you're working with an accurate square. All you do is simply look for any open gaps down your line. After you've checked your square, we'll also be using for the alignment procedures a Shopsmith stop rod. We'll be using a medium blade flathead screwdriver. A crescent wrench will work, or a 1/2-inch wrench. An 1/8-inch Allen wrench and a 5/16 Allen wrench. We'll be using a drill chuck and a drill bit. And we'll also be using a 45-degree triangle. Before you can actually start the alignment procedures of your Mark V, it's important that we first go through and wax the Mark V. Now when we wax the Mark V, we'll be waxing the main table assembly first. When we go through and wax the main table, we recommend that you use a hard paste wax. When you wax your main table, it's important that you wax it thoroughly. Not only do you wax the surface of your main table, but you also want to make certain that you wax inside where your miter gauge tracks are. After you've taken care of the waxing and the wax is dried, simply buff it thoroughly. You'll also be waxing your extension table. It's this piece right here. After you've waxed your extension table, we'll just simply set it aside. Now, by lifting the extension table out, what it allows you to do is to slide your main table assembly to the right. We can take the headstock, slide it down to the right, and now we'll be waxing the tubes. Now, when waxing the tubes, you just simply coat your tubes, both tubes, and then buff them clean. Wax your tubes thoroughly from the left end to the right end. You've waxed your two tables, and to follow the other waxing procedures, you will find those in the owner's manual. After we've taken care of the waxing, our next step will be, of course, to start out with the actual alignment of the Mark V. When we start with the alignment of the Mark V, we'll be using the sanding disc. Now again, we recommend that you use the disc because of the large surface. It is a 12-inch disc, not the saw blade. Your disc mounts right on to the shaft of the Mark V, and then we take a 5/32 Allen wrench to secure the disc into place. When you secure your disc into place, we suggest that you jiggle it a little bit. By doing this, it helps to seat the flat from the Allen screw down to the flat on the shaft. It's actually a reverse taper. After we've seated the Allen wrench, or excuse me, the disc onto the headstock, we'll slide the table assembly over to within 1/4 of an inch from the disc. The first step we go through is to find the high spot on the sanding disc. And to do this, you'll be using a piece of chalk or a grease pencil will work just as well. And we'll also be using a straight edge to mark them. Now to find that high spot, you simply need your Allen wrench and you need your miter gauge. The miter gauge we lay it in the left-hand track, and we take our Allen wrench, we just slide it right through the holes that you'll find on the side of the miter gauge. We extend the Allen wrench through till it's just touching the sanding disc. Then we just simply rotate the sanding disc until we find the highest spot on the disc. Now to do this, you simply move your disc and rotate it till you find that spot. And where you hear the most rubbing, that represents the high spot on the disc, which in our case would be right here. Once we've found the high spot, we'll just simply remove the Allen wrench and we'll mark that high spot with an X. After we've marked that high spot with the X, we'll take our table assembly, slide it out of the way, and we'll take our straight edge. We'll lay that straight edge right on the sanding disc, right at the center of the X, and we scribe a mark across the disc. The purpose of finding the high spot on the sanding disc is to mark it and to avoid it through the alignment procedures. Before we actually go through the alignment procedures, there's two things we want to check. The first thing we want to check is the headrest lock. The headrest lock is located down at the left end of your Mark V. And to make the necessary adjustment, you'll be using a flathead medium screwdriver. To make the adjustment on your headrest lock, you just simply take your flathead screwdriver, you place it down inside on the screw, and raise your headrest lock. You either turn it clockwise or counterclockwise to get the necessary tension needed to secure the weigh tubes down onto the casting. To check this, just simply try lifting the weigh tubes. If there's any slippage or if the way tubes move, you'll need to go back and make the adjustment. Now the second adjustment we want to make is with the carriage lock. The carriage lock is located on this side of the carriage, and to make that adjustment, we'll be using a 1/2-inch socket and a socket driver. For this adjustment, we just simply place it down into the pocket, and with the quarter lock, we can simply check it, and you can see here that my tension is too tight. So to loosen that tension, just simply take a little pressure off until we get it to where we feel most comfortable. At that point right there, we're ready to start the actual alignment procedures. Now the first procedure we go through is to set our table perpendicular to the sanding disc. And to do this, we simply take our table assembly, we pull it over so it's within 1/4 of an inch of our sanding disc. And at this point, to avoid using the high spot of the sanding disc, we turn the disc so that the line is parallel to the table. Now we take our square and we lay our square up on the table next to the disc. At this point right here, you're able to see there is an adjustment needed. Now to make that adjustment, we take our 5/32 Allen wrench and we remove the cap screws holding the table insert into place. The cap screws themselves, just loosen them, taking them out, and we can go with the insert and remove it. And to avoid losing the cap screws, we just simply put the cap screws back into the pockets. Now the bolt that we're looking for to make the 90-degree adjustment is located right down in here. I'm using a stop plunger to hit my bolt. Now to make this adjustment, we'll need a 1/2-inch wrench. We just simply turn the bolt until our square is resting perfect against our sanding disc in the top of the table. Once you've done this, be certain to go back and double check it. To double check it, take your table, tilt it back to the right, press in your plunger, and then tilt the table back to the left and lock it. Once you've locked it, slide your square up against the disc and check for any air pockets or light pockets. At this point, you can see now that our table is perpendicular to the sanding disc. The next alignment procedure that we want to go through is to set our table stop to the right at 45 degrees. But first, before we do that, we want to go ahead and insert the table insert. Now to do this, again, as you removed it, you just simply remove your 2 cap screws and then lock your table insert back into place. Now in setting your table at a 45-degree angle, first thing we'll do is to raise our table assembly up so that we don't interfere with the way tubes. Now here we'll take the table, we'll loosen the table, and we'll tilt it and set it at a 45-degree angle and lock the table into place. Now to check this adjustment, we'll get our table just a little closer to the sanding disc and we'll drop it down to where we're just about touching the 2 way tubes. Now the tool that I'm going to be using to check this is a sliding square. The sliding square is located, placed right on top of your table, and we'll go ahead and slide that table over here just a little closer. And then you want to check between your disc and the edge of the square. Now the 2 bolts that we'll be loosening are located, one is under here, the other one is located on the opposite side. To make this adjustment, you'll still be using your 1/2-inch wrench. Now the 1/2-inch wrench, just simply place it up there, you can check your gap, and then make your adjustment. Now remember, you have 2 of these locks to adjust. one on the control side, and the second is located right here. So again, we make our adjustment. Now, after we've adjusted that, like we did with leveling the table or setting the table perpendicular, we go ahead and loosen our lock, go back and set it at 45 once again, and then we check it by sliding our square up to the disc. Now you can see here that our square is running straight down the surface of the plate of the disc. So that takes care of the alignment procedure at the 45-degree table tilt to the right. Now the next procedure we're going to want to go through will be to set the 90-degree table stops. And to do this, we want to raise our table assembly up and set our table back at its 0 point. Now remember, you have your stop plunger, so just shift your table over so it hits that point. We're not going to be needing the sanding disc for this operation, so we'll just simply slide the headstock back to the left, and we'll remove the disc, and we'll be adding a drill chuck and the drill bit. Again, when you secure your drill chuck on the main spindle, shake it to make certain that you're finding the center of your flat. At this point right here, we'll get them fairly close, and we've got one lock to loosen. It's your headrest lock. Loosen your headrest lock, and at this point, we can stand the entire Mark V up in its vertical position. Now, once your Mark V is in the vertical position, make sure that you take care of your vertical base lock. Secure it in, and what that does is to keep your headstock and the power unit from going to the left. Now, to check your 90-degree setting, our table assembly, we set it back at its 90-degree point, or so that it's perpendicular to the drill bit. Now, we want to make certain that our table lock is secure. Now, to check this, you're using a square. We'll take our square, place it on top of the table, and up against the drill bit. Now, if you take a look right here, you'll notice that we have a light pocket. So before we make any adjustment, we want to take that square and place it on the opposite side. If you notice right here, our gap now is at the bottom on the back side. So to make the adjustment so that our square is perpendicular to the bit, we go back again and use our 1/2-inch wrench. Now, the adjustment we'll be making, actually we have 2 bolts to adjust. The 2 bolts are located here and here. So to make the adjustment, we'll take our table, we'll set her back up, we'll make the adjustment with the bolt. Now, we adjust the front one. We'll go back and check it from the front bolt, take our square, and place her back up here. Now that you've set your table perpendicular to the drill bit, the next alignment operation is going to take us back down into the horizontal position. Now, the next adjustment we're going to make is in the table tilt indicator. Now, with that adjustment, we're first going to take our table assembly, we're going to tilt it back to its 0 point. Now, the tool that we'll be using for the adjustment in the table tilt indicator will be the 1/8-inch Allen wrench. And to make this adjustment, all we have to do is to loosen the 2 cap screws. And we'll take our table tilt indicator, line it up so our 2 0 points are in line. There. Now, the next thing we want to do is to line our miter gauge slots parallel to our sanding disc. And to do this, we'll remove the drill chuck and the drill bit, and we'll mount our sanding disc back on the Mark V. Now we want to take our table assembly and slide it over to within 1/4 of an inch. Be certain that when you go through this, your table is directly at the center point of the sanding disc. Now, we'll be using the miter gauge, and the miter gauge will be located in the left-hand miter slot. Now with the miter gauge, before any alignment adjustments are taken care of, we first want to take care of one thing. To make certain that our miter gauge protractor, this piece here, is setting flush to the table. Now to make this adjustment, we'll want to use a small slot screwdriver. Now inside your miter gauge, on the left side and the right side, we have little nylon screws that are adjusted with the small flat or slot screwdriver. We'll slide the slot screwdriver in, and we'll simply make the adjustment until we've taken all the wobble out of the miter gauge. Now once we've taken the wobble out of the miter gauge, we want to make certain we haven't raised the miter gauge bar above the surface of the table. Now after we've taken care of this adjustment, we can then set the miter gauge tracks parallel to the sanding disc. To do that, we're going to be using a stop rod, and we're going to be using a set screw that'll lock the stop rod into place. Now we'll take the miter gauge up and just touch the stop rod against the disc. Now before the adjustment is made, you'll notice the line on the sanding disc. We want to make sure that that line is running vertical. Now with the line running vertical, it gives us a much more accurate reading in aligning the miter gauge slots parallel to the disc. With the stop rod into place, we can take a set screw that comes with the miter gauge stop rod, or we can take a set screw from any other piece of equipment that we get with our Mark V. Now what I'm using here is a set screw right out of the rip fence. I'll take that set screw and I'll drop it down on the left-hand side, and I'll just snug it into place. Now once we've done that, we can then take our miter gauge and move it across the table. What we're trying to achieve here is to make certain that our miter gauge tracks are perfectly parallel to the plane of the disc. Now, if any adjustment is needed, it's going to involve using a 5/16 Allen wrench. The 5/16 Allen wrench that we're using loosens 4 bolts. The 4 bolts that we're referring to are on this side of the table system, 2 located here, and 2 located on the opposite end of the table. Now we're using a 5/16 Allen wrench to loosen those 4 bolts, but before we loosen them, we first want to take our table assembly and tilt it to a 45-degree angle. By tilting it to a 45-degree angle, it allows you to get to the 2 bolts on this side of the table assembly, as well as the 2 bolts on the opposite side of the table assembly. After we've loosened all 4 bolts of the table, we can take our table assembly and put it back at its 0 point. Now before we check the alignment of the table to the disc, it's important that the high spot of the disc that you've marked with an X be perpendicular to the table assembly. At this point, we slide our miter gauge up. Now we can see that our miter gauge, the stop rod inside, is not touching, so we'll pull it up so it's just touching against the disc. We'll lock the stop rod down into place, and we'll slide the miter gauge across the table. Now we can see that we have a slight gap on this side of the disc, but yet we're just touching on this side here. So now to make the adjustment, I'll move my miter gauge over to where the gap is between my stop rod and my disc, and I'll tap the table very lightly. Now once I've gotten my stop rod just touching the sanding disc, I'll pull it back and make certain that I'm rubbing all the way across. Once that I've got it set, I can go back and lock or tighten the 2 front bolts under the table. To do this, we'll take our 5/16 Allen wrench, we'll snug the front one, go back, do the same on the opposite end of your table. Now after we've secured those 2 locks, we can now take our table assembly and tilt it back to a 45-degree angle. Again, by tilting the table to a 45-degree angle, it allows us to get to the back two bolts very easily. After we've secured those 4 bolts, again, let's put the table back in the 0 position and double check our alignment. Now we have a perfect alignment from this side of the sanding disc to the opposite side of the disc by running down the miter gauge track. Now we've taken care of at this point of aligning the miter gauge tracks parallel to the sanding disc. The next operation that we're going to go with in the alignment is squaring the miter gauge to the disc. To do this, we'll take our square and we'll place the base of the square against the sanding disc, and we'll simply pull our miter gauge up so it's just touching. Now at this point you can see we have a gap on the side to my right, but yet we're touching back here to the left. So now to make the adjustment, we'll just simply loosen the lock on the miter gauge, and we'll tilt the trunnion, this piece here, so it's flush and snug. Before any adjustment is done to the miter gauge, we'll take a medium blade screwdriver and we'll loosen up the little scale that you have that gives you your 0 point to the 0 point on your miter gauge. Now at that point right there, we'll go back, be certain that our square is flush against the disc and flush against the miter gauge, and we can go back and make our 90 adjustment. Now the 90-degree adjustment that I'm making is on the left side of the miter gauge. So to make this adjustment here, I simply turn the screw in or back it out depending on whichever it needs. We're still flush. We're hitting flush against the disc. We're still running flush against the miter gauge. So we'll go ahead and secure it into place. Now we'll double check to make sure we're still running flush with the disc and the miter gauge. And once we've got it zeroed, then we can go to our next alignment setup. Now the final 2 adjustments we need to make in the miter gauge are setting the 45-degree stop to the left and the 45-degree stop to the right. The tool that we'll be using to do this and checking it with will be the sliding square. Now we can remove the bar of the square and set it aside. All we'll be using here will be the head of the square. Now in setting this at the 45-degree stop to the left, we'll tilt the miter gauge over and line the 45 up, and we'll take our head and just slide it right up to the sanding disc. Now you can see here I've got to make a very slight adjustment, and to make this adjustment we're going to be using the small slot screwdriver. Now I'll either be turning the screwdriver to the left or back depending on how my adjustment needs to be set. Now right there we're right at the 45-degree stop to the left, and to check the 45-degree stop to the right we'll just remove the head of the square and we'll take our miter gauge, turn it around, slide it back into the track of the table, set it back 45 degrees, lay the head back in. Now with this adjustment procedure, everything is identical as we had it here in the front for the adjustment to the left. Now after we've taken care of this adjustment, it allows us now to go on to another adjustment. The next alignment procedure we're going to go through is making certain that our rip fence is running parallel to the miter gauge tracks. Now in adjusting the rip fence, the first thing we want to do is to loosen 2 screws. The 2 screws you see right here. In loosening those two screws, you're using a 5/32 Allen wrench. Loosen the back screw, and be certain to loosen this screw because you cannot get to it when your rip fence is laying on top of the table. Now after loosening the two screws, what that does for you, that allows this piece here to move. But that's not all you've got to do with your fence. Before any adjustment is done to this fence, we first want to check two things. One, the outfeed clamp assembly. Two, we want to check the fence rest assembly. Now, when we make the adjustments, the first adjustment I'm going to make will be in the outfeed clamp assembly. You can see here when we move the handle and try to secure the rip fence, the handle moves very freely. We want there to be tension on that, so we go back and we loosen the two screws you see here. When we loosen these two screws, we take a 5/32 Allen wrench and we loosen both of them. At this point, we want to tighten or loosen, depending on the tension that you have on your handle, the coupling bolt. Now to adjust that, we're using a 1/2-inch wrench. Then we'll go back and we'll check our lock. Now here I've added too much tension, so I want to go back and I want to loosen it. Now the ideal adjustment that you'll have will be that your assembly gives you at least 1/8 of an inch or less clearance to the table tube. Excellent. Now the next adjustment in the fence rest is right here. Now to make that adjustment, we're using a medium blade flathead screwdriver, and we want to make certain that the fence rest is resting even on both sides, left side and the right side, to the table tube. Once you get it set, just take your medium blade screwdriver loosen it, lay it down, check it, make any adjustment if necessary. Then we tighten it. Now before we go to the alignment of the fence, we'll double check what we've just done. One, your handle lock. Two, the fence rest. After we've checked both of those, and those are set, now we can set the fence parallel to the miter gauge track. To do this, we'll take the table assembly and we'll move it all the way down to the right. Now we're going to be using the miter gauge stop rod again, and in this time we're going to be placing it in from the left-hand side so that it's close up to the fence. Now before any adjustment is checked, it's important that you lock the back of the rip fence into place. Now we'll take the miter gauge stop rod, we'll slide it in till it's just making contact with the back side of the rip fence, and we'll secure the miter gauge stop rod into place. Now we'll take the miter gauge stop rod and we'll push it across the table, and as you can see here, we have a gap on this end of the fence. Now to make the adjustment, it's just a simple matter of tapping the fence. Now you can see here we're making full contact from one end of the table down to the other. Now once we know we have full contact, we'll go back and take our 5/32 Allen wrench and we're going to tighten the first set screw underneath the table. And you can get to that set screw by going from the in-feed table bar up to the fence. Once you've secured the in-feed set screws, you want to very gently remove your rip fence and tighten the set screw that you can't get to with your fence placed on your table. Now, after you've taken care of that set screw, place your fence back on your table and secure it back into place. And we'll get it over there just a little closer, and we'll check from the back side to the front side. Now, after we've made sure that our fence is running parallel to the miter gauge track, the next adjustment we're going to make is with the extension table. Now, the extension table, we place it down at the right end of the Mark V. Now, the first adjustment we'll take care of will be in checking the height of the table. And we'll eyeball the height of the table to make certain that it's as close as we can possibly get it, and we'll lock her into place. Now, with your extension table, you have 4 bolts you want to loosen underneath. 2 at this end, 2 in the back end. And to loosen those bolts, you can use either a crescent wrench or a 9/16 wrench. We'll loosen the 4 bolts. And once we've loosened those 4 bolts, we want to first take care of leveling the extension table to the main table. Now, a method that we've found that works extremely well is to take the rip fence and straddle it between the main table and the extension table. Once we get it located in the center, we secure the rip fence into place. Now, after you've secured the rip fence into place between your extension table and your main table, we can loosen the lock at the end, allowing the tubes in the extension table to drop down. Now, at this point right here, if any shimming is needed to be done, with your Mark V, you can get any type of a shim necessary to take care of the shimming. Now, the shims that we have here would be placed between the bolt or the casting and the actual tube assembly. After you've taken care of your shimming, at that point there, you can go back and secure the 4 bolts of your extension table into place. By doing this, it's automatically squaring the extension table as well as the leveling already being taken care of. After we've aligned our extension table to the main table, our internal tubes and our floating table should slide through the extension table into the main table easily. Now, for those of you that have purchased your Shopsmith Mark V Model 510 prior to January 1987, some shimming may be required under the main table. Now, the final table adjustment we need to make is to bring the main table up parallel to the extension table. To do this, we first want to check to make sure that our main table is parallel on the in-feed table. Now, once we get it so we can see that it's parallel on the in-feed table, we'll go back and check the out-feed table. Now, as you can see here, we have a slight gap on the main table. So to bring that gap up, we first loosen the headrest lock, and we take our Allen wrench, and we just adjust the Allen screw, which is located right under the weigh tube here. We adjust it to bring the main table up parallel on the outfeed side. We'll lock our headrest lock, and we'll double check. Check your outfeed side, and we'll check the infeed side. Now, once that we have the main table parallel on the infeed side, as well as the outfeed side to the extension table, we've taken care of all alignment procedures for the main table. Now, the last alignment procedure we have to go through on the Mark V 510 is the alignment of the 2 lathe points. Now, as you can see, we've already removed the main table and the extension table, And we've added the drill chuck and the drill bit in place of the drive center. Now the purpose of adding the drill bit is for a greater extension from the headstock to this tailstock piece. For the alignment, we'll simply pull the headstock to the right as far as she'll go to where our 2 points are just about touching. We'll secure the headstock lock into place and the tailstock lock into place. Now here, the first adjustment we'll make will be in what we call the eccentric cup. It's this dial right here. It takes the 5/32 Allen wrench. We'll loosen the eccentric cup up, and you can see now we can make that adjustment by moving it to the left or to the right. Once we've lined the 2 points up, we just simply secure the extension cup into place. When you're locking your eccentric cup into place, we recommend that you don't over-tighten the lock. Now the second adjustment that we want to make is the vertical adjustment with the tailstock. To do this, we simply loosen the tailstock lock, and we can raise or lower it. Now if you take a look right here, we have a very little adjustment to make. So I'm going to secure my tailstock into place, and I'm going to loosen the 2 collars that are mounted on the tubes of the tailstock. With loosening those, we can then go back and raise or lower the tailstock to where our 2 points are running perfect in line with one another, and then lock the 2 collars down into place. At this point right here, we've taken care of the alignment of the Mark V lathe and all of the alignment procedures of the Mark V. Now next, I'd like to show you some of the preventative maintenance steps we go through on the Mark V. First, we've already covered the waxing of the weigh tubes, also the top of the main table and the extension table. You'll also want to wax inside the pockets for your extension table as well as your tailstock. And next, I'd like to show you where the lubrication points are. Now, getting into the lubrication points, first you want to turn your machine to top speed, and to do that you will need to plug your Mark V in and turn your machine up to high speed. After doing that, unplug the Mark V. Now in the lubrication, we will want to remove this cap right here. Removing that cap right there, you can just pull it off with your hand, and then there's 2 screws in the belt cover that we want to remove. 1 screw on my side. We'll set that screw aside, and we've got 1 other screw to loosen on this side. Now after we've removed the screws, the belt cover itself will simply slide right down the tubes. Now the 2 lubrication points that we need to get to, one is down in here, and the second will be reached in through here. Now the tool that I'll be using for lubrication will be a glue injector. Now the glue injector itself can be filled with oil. Now with the glue injector, the 2 holes, one, the bottom hole, all you have to do is to rotate this to where you discover or find the hole. Once you've found that hole, you can take your glue injector, insert it in between the spring, down into the hole, squeeze just a little bit of oil in there, and then go to your next lubrication point. Now the next lubrication point that I'd like to show you is inside your headstock. To get to that point, simply rotate your quill until you find that point, insert your glue injector into that hole, and squeeze just a little oil in there. Now the oil that we recommend that you use is 10-weight non-detergent oil. After you've taken care of your lubrication points, it's best to clean the quill assembly. Now the quill itself is the black extension of the shaft. Underneath the quill you have teeth. And to clean those teeth you want to use either a toothbrush or a wire brush. Now the purpose of cleaning these teeth is to allow your quill assembly to move freely in and out of your headstock. Now we hope that this video that we presented to you gives you a better understanding of the alignment and the maintenance procedures of your Shopsmith Mark V. If you have any questions, refer to your owner's manual or call Shopsmith on our toll-free number and ask for our customer service department, or visit one of our Shopsmith locations. Thank you.